Today's topic is on 1099 versus employee, why the concern, with presenters Joseph Rockwell, Senior Tax Manager at SaxBST Fromm & Company, Max Dykers, Senior Consultant for Stage 100 Contractor at Accordant Company, and Rob Meal, a Senior Consultant for Stage 300 Construction and Real Estate at Accordant Company. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone will be in listen-only mode, so if you have questions, please type them into the questions box on the screen, and we will address them at the end of the session. If you need to step away, please do not put your phone on hold. If you have hold music, it will play for all the attendees. This webinar will be recorded, and we will email out a copy to everyone within a few days. I will now turn it over to you, Joseph.
Okay, very good. Joseph Rockwell from SaxBST Fromm & Company. I'm a CPA with SaxBST, and I have over 30 years experience as a CPA. And I'm going to give you some background and a lot of information about what the IRS does with respect to their classification of independent contractors versus an employee. And it's a very important topic to the IRS. I'm going to just put up a little item right now on your screen. Hopefully you can see that, about just a little background from why it matters. From the individual's perspective, generally, if you're an employee, then your employer is going to withhold income tax, and they're going to withhold your portion of Social Security and Medicare taxes. And they're also, the employer is responsible for paying its share of Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment taxes on your wages. And you'll generally then you'll get a W-2 if you're an employee. If you're an independent contractor, then you'll generally receive a Form 1099-MISC to report what the business paid to you. And there's no withholding if you're deemed to be an independent contractor, so generally an independent contractor is required to pay his own taxes, generally through estimated taxes during the year, or pay them when he files his tax return at the end of the year. An independent contractor would generally file a Schedule C on their Form 1040, and they would be able to deduct any related business expenses on that Schedule C. From the employer's point of view, paying the independent contractor, if an employer treats you as an independent contractor, then from the employer's point of view, it offers the benefit to the employer that they don't have to do any income tax withholding, no unemployment withholding, no liability for acts of the employees, no federal and state discrimination laws, and no fringe benefits like no pension plan, retirement plan, medical coverage, those types of items. So, there's been a lot of talk about this, and there was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that said that a lot of smaller employers are, opting to treat certain workers as independent contractors because they feel that it's essential to remaining competitive, and it's significantly less expensive to hire the independent contractor because of the fact that they don't have to pay any of those employment taxes or provide any fringe benefits to the employee. However, the IRS has been very vigilant and stresses this area very, very harshly, and they look at it very carefully. They audit a lot of employers to determine whether or not a employer is treating its workers properly as independent contractors or as employees. And as you can see on the screen there, if the IRS determines that a worker has been treated as an independent contractor and it's really an employee, then the employer is required to pay all the back taxes, including the FICA, Medicare, unemployment, and there's interest and penalties, and they could amount to some significant dollars on behalf of the employer to have to pay all those taxes. And as I just said, the IRS has stepped up its activity in this area, and so there could be a big cost to the employer if it's determined that they misclassified the worker incorrectly and treated them as an independent contractor as opposed to an employee. So with that background about where the IRS is at and why they care so much and why it matters to the IRS about the classification of an employee or of a worker as an employee versus an independent contractor, then we'll go into how the IRS determines whether or not the worker is an employee or an independent contractor. And I'm putting up on the screen now, the Internal Revenue Service has a 20-point checklist for independent contractors. And I'll try and go through these and try and explain which ones are the most important. They're basically, the 20 points can be summarized that they're financial control and behavioral control, and then there's a little bit about the relationship of the parties. The financial control is probably one of the most important factors in that the profit or loss motive. In other words, can the worker make a profit or a loss as a result of the work aside from the money earned from the various projects? So there has to be a real economic risk, not just the risk of not getting paid. So that's a very big financial incentive. The next factor is the investment factor. Does the worker have an investment in his equipment and facilities used to do the work? And obviously, the greater the investment, then the more likely that the person would be an independent contractor. Works for more than one firm. A true independent contractor would hold himself out to the public, and he would be willing to work for any company or any person. So this factor is one of these are the most important financial factors, and this is if he is able to work for more than one firm, if he holds himself out to the public, has a listing in a phone book, has business cards, has a website that advertises himself, things like this would set forth that this person is holding himself out to the public as an independent contractor and that he will willing to take jobs from various companies, and that would be a strong indication, generally speaking, that he's an independent contractor. I mean, it doesn't mean that he couldn't take a job, a specific job with a company for, maybe it could be a 3-month job, a 6-month job, but as long as he's still holding himself out that he can work for other companies, then he would still be generally considered to be an independent contractor. And well, number 4 is basically similar to number 3, as I've been saying. The services are offered to the general public. So those are the key financial factors. And if the worker can answer yes to those first 4 factors on the 20-point checklist, then you would have a really strong case that you're dealing with an independent contractor. So those are probably the 4 most important factors in terms of being able to establish whether or not you're an independent contractor, and those are called the financial control factors. The next factors are what's known as the behavioral control factors, and these factors relate to the amount of control the employer or the person that you're working for has over you. Do you have the right to give instructions about when, where, and how you're going to work. In other words, does the employer or the person you're working for have the right to give you, the worker, instructions like, you know, you have to be at this job site every day at 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock every day, etc. Training. Do you train the worker to do the job in a particular way? So if the employer is providing you with significant training to do the job, then that would indicate that you may possibly be an employee as opposed to an independent contractor, because generally an independent contractor is already trained and knows how to do his job, and he doesn't need any specific extra training. Integration, are worker services so important to your business that they become a necessary part of the business? Services rendered personally as opposed to delegating tasks to someone else. So does the person have to work independently, or can he delegate to someone else? Like an independent contractor could theoretically have subcontractors or other people that work for him that he could delegate work to. For example, you could maybe have a computer programmer who's doing some programming, but he may have some assistants who maybe he can delegate to. Or it could be anything in the construction business. You could have, obviously, you can have employees that work for you, and you're going to, even though you're the one that has the specific job contract, you can delegate to your workers, whether they're independent contractors or employees of you, to do the work on your behalf. So that's a key thing as to whether or not you would be deemed to be an independent contractor. Continuing relationship, again, is it constant? I mean, certainly as an independent contractor, you can have continuing relationships with various employers or various jobs that you may work on, and that's probably important that you have certain jobs, but it's also important that it not be exclusive, that you have a continuing relationship only with one person. You need to be able to be, and this dovetails back to number 3, works for more than one firm and services offered to the general public. You need to be able to perform work for more than one person. I think I skipped number 9, but we did talk about that. I alluded to that through number 8 with the hiring of assistants. In other words, hiring people that can, you know, work for you and perform some of the duties that you've contracted to perform on that specific construction job, you know, to work for you and perform some of those duties. Work hours, we alluded to that in number 5 with the instructions. Independent contractors generally can set their own hours. They're not, you know, you may be working at a job site and, you know, they may want you there between 9 and 5, but, you know, you're getting paid for the contract that you're performing, for the services you're performing for that contract. And, you know, if you get there at 8 o'clock or you get there at 10 o'clock, you know, you're getting, you probably bid on that contract, and you're getting paid for performing the contract and getting it done. Let's say you're repaving a road, setting up some guardrails, doing, you know, whatever type of construction work you're doing, then, you know, certainly there has to be a certain time frame when you have to be there and perform the services. But you know, if it's 9 to 5 and that's the only person you're working for, you're probably not an independent contractor. But if you can set your own hours, then you would be deemed to be an independent contractor, generally speaking. Number 12, full-time work. Spend all of his or her time on your job. Independent contractors choose when and where they work. Again, a lot of these things kind of are interrelated. A lot of these items, and some of it may sound repetitive, but these are the items that the IRS has trained their agents to look for. There's a lot of court cases in this area. There's a lot of activity in this area. The Department of Labor at the federal level and the state level get involved in these items very much too, especially on unemployment claims or disability claims, etc. So these factors become very important. Work done on the premises. Must the individual work on your premises, or do you control the route or location where the work must be performed? Generally the independent contractor will be able to perform the work wherever he deems necessary. Of course, if he's got a contract to work on the George Washington Bridge, he's probably got to be at the GWB to do that work, not in his office somewhere else. But again, some of these factors are somewhat subjective, obviously, depending on the nature of the specific job. Sequence, right to determine the order in which services are performed. Again, I don't think that's a major factor, but that, again, this seems to indicate that may indicate employee status if they tell you have to do certain things in a certain sequence. But generally, an independent contractor would perform, the necessary parts of the job in the appropriate order that he deems correct, according to the specifications of the job, which may have been determined by someone else other than the person that he's working for, such as an architect or whoever drew up the job specs. Pay schedules, how do you get paid? That's important. How are you getting paid? Whether you're getting a paycheck every week, then then you're probably an employee. Independent contractors, as we've been alluding to all along, are generally paid by the job or by some sort of commission or set scale of so much as the job's being completed as you're going along. If the job's 25% complete, you'll get 25% of your pay for that, whatever you bid on the job. Expenses, if you have your own independent expenses, you'd be an independent contractor, and you'd deduct them on Schedule C of your tax return. Tools and materials, independent contractors will generally bring their own tools and equipment and whatever's necessary, excuse me, to the job site, whereas if you're not an independent contractor, then the employer would provide you with the necessary tools and equipment. Can you fire the worker? Well, if you're an employer in an employee relationship, certainly the employer can fire an employee, but an independent contractor generally can't be fired because there's the risk of breach of contract lawsuit. And although I'm not an attorney, certainly that's a huge risk. If you've contracted to perform a major job on Route 80 or something, and it's $1 million job, and you just leave in the middle of the job, well, you're an independent contractor, and certainly you can do your own thing, but you're going to be looking at a probably pretty big lawsuit. So that's an important thing. And the worker's right to quit. Can the worker quit at any time? Well, employees generally can, unless they have some sort of restrictive employment agreement. But an independent contractor, as it says here, has the legal obligation to complete the contract, as I just said, and it dovetails with number 19, that if he doesn't, then there's that risk of a breach of contract lawsuit that really an independent contractor probably doesn't want to get involved in, because lawsuits, as we all know, become very, very expensive. So I think that's a pretty good overview of the independent contractor rules. I just want to throw up the W-9 form real briefly, because I know that Max and Rob, I think, are going to talk about this, which the W-9 form is a request for taxpayer identification number and certification. And generally, if you're an independent contractor, you would supply this form with your, depending on whether you have an EIN number as an yourself, which you could apply for with the IRS, or if not, as you can see in Part 1, you either put your Social Security number. If you're just like a sole proprietor, you put your Social Security number, although sole proprietors, if they have a business, can also apply for an employer identification number from the IRS. And if you have an employer identification number, you would use that, and you would give this to the person that you're working with in order to show that you're an independent contractor, and when they pay you and provide you with the 1099, then that's the number that they're going to put on the 1099 so that that information can be sent to the IRS, and the IRS can verify that you received those receipts for the services you performed, and then accurately check that you reported them correctly on your tax return. So that's a pretty good overview of all the major issues with respect to the independent contractor, what the IRS looks for, what the 20 points are, what's important about, why it's important to determine whether or not you're an independent contractor or an employee. And I briefly went through the W-9, so now I am going to send it over to the next presenter, which I believe is Rob Neal. You ready, Rob?
I am set to go.
Okay, very good, thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. First, I'm going to apologize up front. I'm a little under the weather, so if I cough in your ears, I do apologize for that. What we're going to talk about is, now that Joseph's gone through the qualifications for the subcontractors, we want to talk a little bit about how to track pertinent information within the SAGE 300 program. First of all, this is the compliance for subcontractors is in versions 12 and 13. To set up your warnings for your compliance issues, we would go under Company Settings and AP Settings. And down the bottom now we have another button for Compliance Settings. And when we go into our compliance settings, we are able to track as far as if subcontractors, if you're providing them with lien waivers to sign off on. And the main thing here is our compliance warnings that we want to talk about. So each one of these items, excuse me, can have different warning levels as far as if you're tracking lien waivers, certified reports from vendors, insurances for vendors, and then you can set up your own miscellaneous items that you wish to track. And you can see our warning levels here. It can show a warning when we're going to enter an invoice for a vendor that is not in compliance. It can show a warning when we go into to pay an invoice for a vendor that's not in compliance. And then we can actually block payment if a vendor is not in compliance. And the warning levels are specific to lien waivers, certified reports, insurances, and then our miscellaneous items. So we would set that up first. Then on our vendor setup, I will come out here to our vendors and just select B&M Marble here. There is now another tab on the vendor setup for insurance and compliance. So in here, I'm able to track up to 6, the general liability, the auto, the umbrella, the workers' comp, and then I have 2 other insurances that I can track if I want to. I can make these insurances be required specifically for a commitment. So even though I might have workers' comp, if I have a requirement for a specific insurance policy for each commitment or subcontract that I have with the vendor, I would check this box off, and then on the individual subcontract, which will show you, we would have to put in specific insurance information on that vendor, on that subcontract. I also have the ability to go in and set up miscellaneous compliance items. Now, out of the box, there are no miscellaneous compliance items. So I won't have a drop-down list here of miscellaneous compliance items. In order to set those up, what we would do is out under File, Company Settings, I will go to Custom Descriptions. And under the Custom Descriptions, I will scroll down to my miscellaneous compliance types here. And in here, I can customize this list. So in order to customize it, I would just hit Customize List, and now I can add or rearrange or delete things that I'm not going to use. So if I do want to track business licenses, for example, I would just click on Add, put in business license, hit OK. So now that's part of my list. And again, I can put these in whatever order. So if I wanted to move the W-9 up to the top, if I wanted the business licenses to be next, so I can control all of those things. Also, I can set up jurisdictions. So if I have different areas that require different licensing, I can put in those jurisdictions. And the same thing would apply here, where I would click on the list, do my customize, and then add whatever jurisdictions that I wanted to add. So now I can go ahead and hit OK there, and hit OK. So now when I go out to set up my vendor, we'll go ahead and pick B&M Marble again. And when I go to the compliance area, I can now add from that drop-down list the W-9. And if I mark that it's required here, if I go to pay that vendor and I do not have that the W-9 was received, I will get a warning. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this and save that vendor and close. And now what will happen is if any of the compliance items are not met, when I go to enter an invoice for that vendor, and it shows up for me here. So I would select, put in my vendor ID. Now, as soon as I get the vendor ID in, I get information that the vendor is not in compliance. So I'm missing an insurance certificate, and I'm missing a miscellaneous item. I can click on the details here, and it's going to tell me which items I'm not in compliance with for that vendor. So again, depending on what my compliance warnings are set up as, I can get warned here, I can get warned when I'm selecting the vendor for payment, and I can actually block payment if compliance issues are not met. I do also have the option of ignoring it, or I can go to the compliance management screen for this vendor and say that I've received things. So I could go to the miscellaneous and do that I've received their W-9 if I wanted to. So those are where the warnings come in. Now, where you can also have out here under our vendor setup, if I am tracking the business licenses, under my compliance, that would go under my miscellaneous items again. But now I can do the business license, and I can say where I have received, which area I have received, and is it required for me to have a business license for certain jurisdictions. And where this comes into play is when we go over to job cost, and I'm in my job setup, there's now a new tab on our jobs for job compliance. And in here, I can select which jurisdiction the job is related to. So now I can make sure that the individual companies that I have working on a job have business licenses in the jurisdictions that I've specified on the jobs. Now, when I go in to do a commitment for vendors now, if I have marked that the vendor has specific insurances required for a job, just going to set up a new commitment here. Again, when I'm entering, I get my warning about here. I can actually say I don't want to use a specific vendor because they're not in compliance. In here, I can establish a retainage percentage to automatically be withheld from the subcontract. I would pick my job. And go ahead, put in my dollar amount. And now what will happen is if I have it marked that the vendor needs insurance specific for a subcontract, I will come over to my insurance tab, click on that. Now, even though the vendor might have insurance set up, I can click on View Vendor Insurance. It's read-only. I can view what's in the vendor record over in AP, but it is going to require me, if this checkbox is clicked, to put in vendor insurance information for that vendor. So I can get very specific, and again, is it required? Have I received it? So this would be specific for that subcontract. So once you've established that a vendor is to receive a 1099, and if you set up those compliance items, you're able to use that. And then the other step to making sure that the vendor does receive a 1099 is on our 1099 settings tab, we would check the box off that vendor receives 1099. We would have their EIN number. We would do, if they have a trading as name or a doing business as name, we would put that in here. And then we would select the 1099 type that the vendor is to receive. If you do happen to have a vendor that receives multiple 1099 types, you would need to set that vendor up twice. We can only select one 1099 type per vendor. So once you've established and you've gone through the 20 points that Joseph went through and determined that we can have this person set up as a 1099 vendor, then we would go through, put in the information as far as they receive a 1099, and then establish that we want to track, do we have a W-9 received from them, and if we mark it required and we haven't received it, it's going to flag us when we go to enter invoices for that individual company. That is pretty much setting up 1099 vendors and associating them with subcontracts in Sage 300. I guess now I will turn the microphone over to Max when he's ready.
Yep, I'm here. Hey, guys. And let's see. I'm going to show my screen. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see this here. So I'm Max Dykers. I'm a Sage 100 consultant. I've been doing this for about 17 years, and I see some familiar names on the attendee list, so nice to see everybody here. I'm going to talk about a few of these issues in Sage 100, vendor certificates, and a letter that you can get related to the certificates, and a report. Also setting up retainage on a subcontract, and also a lien waiver that you can get out of Sage 100. Also, we'll see some of the warnings that can come up based on these different things that we'll set up here. So this is the vendors window for 4 accounts payable vendors. I'm just in the sample company, so you could go into this exact same sample company and see these same setup items that we have in here. So on any vendor, after you've saved the vendor and entered them, you go down to certificates on the bottom here, this little button. Okay, and it'll pop up a little sort of spreadsheet here. Now this is fairly open-ended. We don't have quite the level of control that you just saw in Sage 300. Basically, the name of the certificate you type. It's text only, so it's just, contractor's license, workers' comp, general liability. You can put in a date that the certificate was received. Okay, it's assuming today's date. You can put in the expiration date. This actually wouldn't make sense here. Let's put in 01/01/13 as an example. Okay, and it expired in January. Okay, there we go. And you have a warning and a stop payment, two different features there. So the warning will give you a warning anytime you're entering a new record for that vendor. If it's an AP invoice, if it's a subcontract, any project management document where that vendor is tagged, you'll get a warning that will pop up to remind you that that certificate has expired. The stop payment integrates with the vendor payments window, and it will not bring up their invoices as a default if that stop payment has a yes there. You can override that on the fly as you're cutting checks. I can show you that in a second here. Okay, so you set up whatever certificates you need on this certificates window, and I'll save that. Okay, I'm going to shrink this down now, and I'm going to go to payable invoices. Okay, and I'm going to put that vendor in. And here I get this warning. This vendor has the following expired certificates: contractor's license, workers' comp, general liability, expired, expired, expired. Okay, at that point, I can click OK, and it will still let me enter their invoice if I choose to. It's not so much entering the invoice as much as paying it that you'd want to be held back from. But now I can go and run various reports. So I can do a expired certificates letter. So this is 416 under accounts payable. Oops. Payable reports, vendor documents. Okay, and I have an expired certificates letter. Now I can run this every month, or I can run it for a specific vendor. I can say anybody who's going to expire less or equal to the first of the year. Okay, and this should be a lot of folks because I know the sample data is a couple years old. But it's going to give you a letter. You can see down on the bottom you have page 1 of 63, so it's giving you a separate letter for each vendor that's expired. The sample company is very generic. Obviously, you can customize this letter, put your logo on it, your company information, and so on. It's saying gray heating and cooling. Records indicate that you have expired certificates. Please get us new certificates. Okay. I can also run in the vendor list, which is 411. I can just run a report, and this you probably would do, proactively ahead of time, each month or so, and you can say 01/01/14. And actually, I'm sorry, we would say greater or less or equal to 01/01/14. Okay, and then you'll get a list of all the vendors that are going to expire as of that date or before that date. So then, and their phone number, so you can call them and get the new certificates. You can attach a copy of the certificate back on the vendor's window. So if you folks haven't noticed, pretty much every screen in Sage 100 has a little paperclip on the top. That's very useful. I can click on this paperclip, and I can click Add. Okay, and then I can browse and find like a scanned copy of the certificate, and it'll attach it to that vendor. And then that's there for reference, and it'll make a copy of that file in the Sage 100 file structure on your server. So even if you just scan it to a temporary folder on your computer, when you attach it, it's going to copy it onto your server. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to the subcontract screen, which is 671. Okay, so here I have a subcontract for that same vendor. And you'll see on the top right you have a little retainage percentage here. And I'm going to add, there we go. So I put in 10%, okay, on the subcontract. Now if I save this, and I'm going to remember this subcontract number, 858, I close out of there, and I go to the payable invoices, and I put in subcontract 858. Okay, again, I'm going to get these expired certificates warnings. I click OK on this, and as soon as I put in a value here, then you can see my retention is calculating automatically at that retention rate on the subcontract. Okay. You can also click the little up arrow here to go to the subcontract. I'll click on this. Okay, and that lets you view the details of it. There's also a hold payment button here. So if there's some dispute or issue with the certificates or whatever, you can hold payment on that particular subcontract. Okay. I'll close back out of there. Okay, and I'm going to go into the vendor payments window for 3 and select invoices to pay, number 1. Okay, and this just pops up automatically if I mean, as a selection. So if I put in my vendor, you can put in the first few letters and hit enter, or if you know the vendor's number. You can see down on the left side here I have exclude vendors with overdue certificates, warn on vendors with overdue certificates, and exclude invoices for hold pay subcontracts. So those are automatically selected as a default. If I click display invoices now, I'm going to get nothing because that's how I have it set up. So if I go back in, bring my vendor, and I don't click exclude, I click display, and now I'm going to get a warning. They have expired certificates. So it brings up their invoices anyway. If I have to get the payment out, I know the certificates in the mail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and set one of these invoices to pay. Okay. Hit save, close the window. Now if I go to my pay vendors area here, okay, I'm going to select gray heating and cooling. And now before I print the check, I can print a lien waiver. So I click on that. Okay, and there are a lot of different lien waiver forms that I've seen out there, and the generic one that comes with the system is pretty straightforward. Again, it's just going to be the standard logo and the details of the payment that you're going to send, but it doesn't have any sort of legal jargon that we probably would have to build in there. So we can customize these forms greatly with the form design and reporting module. Okay. One other quick thing I want to show is in the vendors window. If we go back to that gray heating and cooling, if I go to financial information here, I have a 1099 type. As a default, it's going to come in as 0. You can assign it one of these types, and then by doing that and assuming that you've paid the vendor more than $600 in a year, I believe it is, then the vendor 1099 screen will print a 1099 for them. It will keep the running balance, the 1099 balance, regardless of whether you have the type assigned, because you probably or may not have all the types assigned at the beginning of the year, and you just wanted to keep the balance. Also, you can reconcile that balance through a vendor payments report, and I can just come in here and change this number to whatever I want it to be. I can just type over it. Okay, so especially if your fiscal year is not on the calendar year, that number might not be right depending on when you've closed your books and so on and so forth. So that can be changed easily. Let's actually bring that vendor back up, put them as, let's say, sole proprietor. Okay. Now the vendor 1099 form is here in 4.5, vendor 1099 form, and this is through the Atrix module, which is an add-on to Sage 100. It's a great system. It'll do all the payroll forms, W-2s, 941s, all those things. It does these 1099 forms. There's a human resources forms module that's all part of Atrix. It's a fantastic module, a really great improvement. So here I can select the form in question, the year, and so forth, and you can run the 1099s. I think that might be it on the Sage 100 side. So maybe, Krista, I'll pass it back to you unless there are any questions.
There's one question here. I think it's a general question. Do we need to provide a 1099 for companies that are incorporated?
It's probably a question for Joe.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Generally speaking, you do not have to provide a 1099 to a corporation. That's the general rule. I've seen them sent to 1099s, but generally speaking, you do not, to a corporation only. I mean, sole proprietors or probably even a partnership, you may. But a corporation, generally, you're not required under the tax law to send them a 1099.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If so, please type them into the questions box on the screen. Okay, I don't think there's any other questions, so I'm just going to put up here. Okay, so we want to thank everyone again for attending today's Lunch and Learn session. We will be emailing out the presentation to everyone. If you do decide you have questions later on, please feel free to contact us at any time. Thank you and have a great day.